Hello everyone, it's time to do another deck profile. This time the main cover of set 12, the Orfist Masque deck. Or simply an Orfist deck, but I'll call this Orfist Masque deck because it's the main new form of Orfist and that's the main highlight for the deck. But anyway, I was trying to do this deck profile first for set 12, but I didn't get all my cards in time, so I ended up doing Masque first, which was still one of the ones I want to do anyway, so it still works out. But anyway, after for so long of basically actual Orfist support instead of those one cards here and there, it's just good to see more Orfist support and a new form of Orfist overall. Orfist was going to be built up to be one of the main antagonist groups, so it was just nice that we got the Orfist Masque, yay! And I have to say, Orfist Masque has been pretty good actually. It's one of the better Masque units. In fact, I would probably say one of the best actually, because this one actually works very consistently. But anyway, like usual, the deck got some new toys, basically just more ways to call Shadow Army tokens because that's the main playstyle deck. It's focusing on the Shadow Army tokens. At first, the first Orfist was basically build up your Dark Knight and Abyssal Dark Knight, aka just have 2 world cards, and then basically just call your tokens to do stuff. That was a bit boring. And then we got Orfist Regis, which is this one, which did change up the deck a bit with the multi-attack aspect by building up your world cards over time, which in a way worked out a little better. But then there was that one big weakness of Orfist Regis where do you have a guardable hand? Because Orfist Regis' main flaw was in fact you have to discard a card. And that was the main flaw of Orfist Regis because that usually gives you a lot of good offensive pressure but lack of defense. And yes, the last big upgrade that we did, and yes, the last upgrade we got was from set 10, and before that was set 6, where set 6 actually got us a very good card for the deck, but set 10 was very lackluster other than Kubisa that can mill those order cards or world cards from your deck, which is still very helpful, by the way. But now with the new Orfist Masque, we are trading power, but for more hand value. Orfist Masque kind of fixes few problems with the deck, with the one main weakness of that being a Masque unit, you're going to be probably using Masque of Hydrogram. And the fact that we got the ruling of once per turn using order card is actually could be a weakness of this deck, and usually that is the main weakness. It's the fact that you have to use Masque of Hydrogram. And if you have to play at the same turn, you cannot activate another set order because of one of its skills requiring those set orders. This one, a bit like Norlinger, is going to be using set orders for your big plays. And overall, it isn't too bad because it is consistently come back. But still, the one weakness is the 1 order per turn ruling, and 2 is you have to keep up with the set order count. That's basically all it is. But you do get them consistently enough that it's not really much of a problem, and yeah, that's the main weakness. Other than that, the hand issue has pretty much been fixed because of Orfist Masque, and the big beatdown is still there, and I just love it. And also because I love Orfist's design. But anyway, that's it for the thoughts, so time for the deck itself, and we're gonna of course start off with the Ride deck. So, before we start off with the Ride deck, actually, we're just going to show you the Shadow Army token. They're just 15k beat stick star boosters. But these are also going to be your main attackers, and basically the idea is that once you hit Abyssal Darkness, these just randomly appear out of nowhere. But to the Ride deck itself, so first off, we got Cardinal Fang Fulvi. Cardinal because, of course, part of the Ride line. Which we can go to Cardinal Nord Rotis, which has a skill when placed on Vanguard, search your deck for the set order, in this case your world card, and then second skill during the battle discard attacker boosters plus 2k if your world is Dark Knight or Abyssal Dark Knight, but don't care for that, you're just doing it for the Ride line. In which we go to Kubisa. I'm just using this one because archetype reasons, where when you play a world card, choose one of your units, gets plus 5k, then during your turn, if you're at Abyssal Dark Knight, plus 5k. You're not going to care for the rearguard skill, but the plus 5k does make a difference in the early game, I will have to say that. But other than that, you could technically replace this over for Combined Rusher, because Combined Rusher has a drop zone skill that has been very useful. But I do kind of just like to stick with archetype reasons, so I just did it. In which we go to Cardinal Dominus Orfist Regis, which has a skill when placed on Vanguard, you put 1 world card from your hand or drop zone to the order zone, which basically adds up your world count. And it helps out with the second skill because when it attacks, you can counterblast 1, discard a card if your world is Abyssal Dark Knight, aka if you have at least 2 world cards in the order zone. you may call up to 1 Shadow Army token for every 2 world cards in your order zone. And then this card gets us 5k power for each one call. So basically, when you have 2, you call 1. If you have 4, you call 2. And most of the time, when you hit your first grade 3 ride, you're only going to reach 3 with this first skill because spoiler alert, your world cards is grade 2 or higher. So the first one you're going to play is going to be a grade 2 on your grade 2 turn. That will be 1. Your grade 3, where when you ride this, you just put 1 set order, so that will give you 2. And then you just play 1 normally, that will give you 3. So that's most of the time, but luckily there's some support that could just get you more set orders now. And you can technically get the 2 calls on the very first grade 3 turn, which is actually pretty good. But once again, the discard part is a little bit of a hindrance because that does leave you with basically a low hand size, and that has been a little bit of an issue with Orfist. But now with the new stuff, it's been much better. But not only that, the multi-attack aspect is of course could be very powerful because yeah, your set orders support your tokens as well, and your tokens are already 15k beaters. And this card is going to get an extra 5k for every 1 cult. So yes, this is still pretty strong as a first grade 3 option, especially when there's no grade 3 restriction on your opponent. But in that, it's still pretty good. It's just you don't really be stuck in this because your main play is Orfist Masque. And now to the main deck itself. So of course we run 1 more Regis. This is not for Persona Ride. This is for Masque skill, in which we go to the Orfist Masque itself. So Orfist Masque can only be written on top of Orfist like every other Masque unit. And then the second skill is that you can remove its old identity, different name Orfist from this, choose a set order from your drop zone and put it into your order zone. This is of course very helpful because you're of course going to add up your set order count. And of course you want that. Just do keep in mind what set orders you have in your order zone, because there is 1 card that requires you to have a different name set order. And 2, the reason why I am only running 1 Orfist Regis for this one skill is because you're not going to use it too often. You have many other ways just to get those set orders to your order zone. So don't worry about the getting extra Orfists because you technically don't really need it. But the third skill is the main part, where when it attacks, you can counterblast 1, put as many world cards from your set order zone to the drop zone, and then for every 1 you put, you call Shadow Army token on top of a rear guard. Keep this one in mind, on top of another rear guard. And then if you called at least 2, it gets drive +1 to that battle. So like I said, there's ups and downs about Orfist Masque. The main downside of Orfist Masque is that you have to keep up with the set orders. You can actually get that very consistently in this deck. But the fact that you have to keep that up is the main weakness of this deck, because if you can't keep that up, you might actually be very hindered to play the deck. But luckily there's many consistent ways to do it, so it's not an issue. But the big strong part is that you get a guardable hand. Because of the extra dry check, you get an extra card in hand now, and you're not discarding cards. Sure, you're basically trading the discarding card for the set order part, but those are 0 shield anyway. So this is just a little better because basically it gives you a guarding hand. Now, one other weakness it has is that it has to call it on top of the rear guards. That's something that Regis didn't have, but luckily you have a lot of good targets that you want to call on top of anyway that you don't really mind it anyway. So regardless, this is in many ways just better than Orfist Regis for the fact that you don't need to use your hand. So that's the main big part about this. And the extra dry check is just pressuring even if you do not get the extra power, because the deck itself already gets a lot of power, especially just from boosting from the Shadow Army. And also because this card is cool. But other than that, it's just cool. And also because this card is cool, I just love the deck. And yeah, it's just overall pretty good because you don't need to use your hand, just the weakness of the set order mainly. And also calling on top of rear guards, which is something that you don't really mind too much in this deck. And then we go to the 3 Masque of Hydrograms. This is of course for Orfist Masque, and it's a Masque deck, so you just run it. So that's it for the main grade 3 stuff that you need to worry about. Let's go to the set orders before going down to the remaining units. So first off, the best set order is Overcoming an Eternity. So you play it by Soul Blasting 2, and the first skill is that in the order zone, every world card will have the same ability, where if you have 1 world card in the order zone, it's a Dark Knight. If you have 2, it's Abyssal Dark Knight. Every world card has the same ability, so don't worry about that part. That's why I said have 2 set orders basically. And your goal is to have at least 2 set orders so you're Abyssal Dark Knight. But the main ability is that in the order zone, each time the Shadow Army token is called, that Shadow Army token gets us 5k power. And of course, like I said, this is the main card that you're going to be supporting your Shadow Armies, because you call them mid-battle. they get extra power. And the more copies of these you have, the more power they get. This is why you want to run 4 of these. And this is the one that I usually do not send to the drop zone. I keep this one in the order zone and put the other ones in the drop zone because they have on-place abilities. Like Halloween Moonlight Knight, which when you play on the order zone, you draw a card. Same thing with the Dark Knight and Abyssal Dark Knight, but yeah, the extra draw is just very helpful. That's actually the reason why I run 3, because you kind of just want to see this as soon as you can. Over this next one where I only play 1 copy because you just want to search this out early game, Eclipse Moonlight, because on place you can counterblast 1, you can call a Shadow Army token. The only reason is mainly for the early game aggression, and once you get this off by the search, which this is going to be your very first search order card anyway, you're going to be basically just having this in the drop zone most of the time, and you could just always recycle this. This is my other set order target that I like to basically target at the drop. So I would actually use this as cost very often because you could recall those Shadow Army tokens every time you put this on the order zone, and that can be very nasty. So that's it for the world lineup. Now to the grade 2s. So we got Cardinal Nord Grunner. So on place from hand, if your world is Dark Knight or Abyssal Dark Knight, look at top 7 cards from your deck to choose up to 2 world cards from among them and put them to the drop zone. This is just very good because it basically just sets you up. And it doesn't matter if you don't use the second skill, because the second skill is at the end of the battle that it attacks the Vanguard. If your world is Abyssal Dark Knight, you can retire this unit to choose 1 world card from your drop zone and put it back to your hand. Most of the time you use it for the first skill because you want to set up your drop zone, but the fact that you can also recycle some of them is also pretty nice. That's why I run 2 of these. If you don't like to run these, I could recommend the Masque of Hydrogram Searcher, but considering how consistently I get the Masque of Hydrogram because of 3 copies, I decided to run this instead, and the setup is just much better. And finally, the start deck card, the Polarxis Dragon. This is really good for the deck. It's unfortunate it's not cardinal, even though it's meant for the deck. But anyway, when you place on rearguard of your Vanguard's Orfist, you can Soul Blast 1, choose a world card with a different name from one from your order zone, place it from drop zone to the order zone. So once again, this is just ways to get back your set orders, basically. And of course, replay them without playing them from hand. So that is the pretty nice part. But the extra bonus that makes this card really good is the second skill, because when a card is placed from it, or when discarded during battle phase, you can draw a card if you're at Dark Knight or Abyssal Dark Knight. This is just really good because this is basically call on top target. In many cases, it could even be your discard target for Regis, because like I said, Regis, if you're stuck on Regis, which is not entirely too bad, you can have the Lackable Guard hand, so this could be your discard fodder for Regis, while also very nice that it could be your call on top fodder because Orfist Masque requires it, and regardless, usually Regis will have you call on top of something anyway, so just being able to get back something is just very nice, and the fact that you can get your set orders back is also really good. So that's it for the grade 2 lineup. For the grade 1 lineup, this is the main grade 1, the new one. Cardinal Principle, Old Part. So when placed on rearguard of your Vanguard's Orfist, you can counterblast 1 to search your deck for 1 world card and put it in your drop zone. Most of the time, you're not going to do this, but it's just nice that you can still search for another one, even though you don't really directly get a plus, but it's just pretty decent combo regardless, because sometimes you will need it. But the second skill is that when retired from rearguard, aka place a card on top of it, if your Vanguard is Orfist, Masque, call a Shadow Army token. Basically, this does the same thing as Naboria, but because Naboria also gets plus 2k for every set order in your order zone, in a way Naboria can be considered better, but this one has been much more helpful because of the fact that you can boost. The fact that you can boost your stuff is why this card is more helpful, plus the fact that you can basically search your deck for your set order. Because to search your deck for the set order, like I said, you're not going to use it too often, but it's really there because it's very helpful. Sometimes you do not have enough set orders in your drop zone, and sometimes you might be desperate for one, and this is just another way to get your set orders out, basically. That's why I run this over Naboria. Naboria's main purpose is to be attacker, but sometimes you just don't have to set up for it, and I have actually witnessed that with this deck before, especially with Regis. I have witnessed situations where my first grade 3 turn is only 2 set orders, and because of lack of ways to get those set orders out, it actually can hinder the deck. That's why that extra search for 1 set order and put it in the drop zone is just very helpful. And on top of that, it's still got the Naboria when called on top, basically. Finally, the 4 PGs because PGs. And then for the trigger lineup, OT because you have to run your OT, the 8 crits, run Cardinal because this is actually part of the archetype. The 3 draws so you could get out your pieces, and the 4 heals, 2 being counter heals. So that's it for my deck profile of my Orfist Masque deck. What do you guys think of it? What other cards would you recommend? And how do you guys like the deck overall? I would have to say this deck is just pretty fun. It's actually much better in many ways than having just Orfist Regis, because one problem Orfist always has was the guardable hand. Sure, the weakness now is the order ruling along with the using set order part, but that's not been a big deal considering the many ways that you could just get it back. And overall, I've been really liking the deck. It's a cool design deck overall, and that's why I love the deck in the first place. And now with this fun little gimmicky multi-attack playstyle, I just love it. And overall, Orfist was just really cool, so of course I was going to get into Masque, and I love Masque. But other than that, what other cards would you recommend? I did suggest a Naboria, and you could even run Cyberkite too if you're really desperate for the Masque of Hydrogram. But considering my record of playing this deck is drawing the Masque of Hydrogram very often, I usually don't really need the Cyberkite anyway. And I do prefer to be able to discard the Masque of Hydrogram in many cases, so I could go for the Orfist Masque right off the bat and play another set order. But other than that, that's my main suggestion, and overall this deck is just fun. And now it's time to say goodbye and go on to the next deck until set 13.